Today we'll be speaking to His Excellency DENIS CHAIBI, the EU Ambassador for Sri Lanka and Maldives, on the importance and the significance of the EU. Your Excellency, a warm welcome, and we're indeed honored and privileged to have you as a diplomatic face for today. To begin with, we all have a passion, a direction, a goal in life. And you started your career in 1993 at the Belgian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and then you moved on to the EU Commission. So it's been a long way that you have come. What persuaded you to become a diplomat?
Thank you. Thank you for having me on this program. I'm very honored. Yeah, 93, so you know my age more or less now. Why did I become a diplomat? First of all, I'm from a mixed background. So my father was one citizenship, my mother was a different citizenship. I'm born in a country but brought up in a different one. And obviously when you come from such a place, you like to look for a job that allows you to build bridges between people, between countries. So it was a natural call to become a diplomat. I also come from a background that benefited enormously from free education, free university. So I got a lot of things free, and I felt it was only normal to go back to public service when public service has given me so much. Last but not least, there's an element of intellectual curiosity. I think that when you are eager to discover, to learn, having the privilege to be a diplomat is a fantastic conduit for this intellectual curiosity.
And also, during your career at EU, you have served in helping out trade, South Asia, the Iran nuclear project, as well as humanitarian assistance and crisis management. You have been posted in Cyprus, Spain, USA, and it's a wealth of experience that you have gained. So what sort of memorable moments could you share with us, and what sort of challenges have you overcome?
Well, I think the most memorable moments when you move from country to country are related to your family. So to be with my wife and son in those places has been really a tremendous experience. In terms of a difficult moment, I think that Sri Lanka, while it offers a lot of interesting moments and emotions, the COVID total lockdown, the lack of petrol and the queues or the demonstrations, these have all been delicate moments to manage, not so difficult but delicate to manage. And especially as a team, you are here in the EU delegation. We have 30 plus members of staff, and obviously when there's COVID, there's stress, and you have to find the right balance. In continuing to work, we are paid by the taxpayer and we have to provide services for that, but we want everyone to be safe. So in these difficult circumstances, to manage the stress of the staff and my own stress has been quite a challenge.
So speaking of EU and Sri Lankan relationships, we go back to the year of 1975 when the EU and the Sri Lankan government concluded a commercial cooperation agreement, and also we established the EU delegation office in 1995. So looking back, what do you feel about this strong relationship that EU and Sri Lanka has been having?
I think it has been a positive relationship altogether, obviously with ups and downs. At the beginning it was very much marked by humanitarian assistance. So the period 95 to 2009, it's when the delegation opened. There was the civil war, obviously, but there was also the tsunami, and so there was massive humanitarian assistance granted by the EU, more than 160 million euro. Then after 2009 we had some difficult moments with the withdrawal of GSP Plus in 2010, problem with fisheries in 2014, but we renewed the commitments with Sri Lanka in 2017 with the GSP Plus reintroduction. And if you look at the evolution, we've seen that many more European tourists came to Sri Lanka between 2010 and 2019. We've seen that exports to the EU remain significant and vital for Sri Lanka. Even the number of remittances, it's different. It's not the same remittances as the Gulf, but there's lots of investments from the Sri Lankan communities in Europe, in France, in Italy, that come here. So it has been a very multifaceted and rich relations. And you know, overall, there's been more than €1 billion in grants, not loans, grants, that have been used for different areas in Sri Lanka, and it has been, I think, to the satisfaction of all.
Also, there was another very important agreement, that was the EU-Sri Lanka readmission agreement that was in force since, I think, May 2005, in order to combat illegal immigrants, and in a more effective way. The discussions are still going on. So what is the status of that agreement at this moment?
That agreement is being implemented. So there's a database at the European level where if there's a lack of paper documentation and the requirements are not fulfilled, then there's an automatic readmission, but it still takes a number of steps. But I think the relationship between Sri Lanka and Europe is much wider than just migration. At the moment, Sri Lanka is in a deep economic crisis, so we have reallocated the funding to make sure that we can buy fertilizers, seeds, we can train the farmers to use more organic fertilizers, since that was the decision of the government at some stage. We are using the funding of the EU to make sure that the tensions that are currently in Sri Lanka regarding the economic situation don't translate into violence. So we are looking at conflict resolution, at social cohesion through many different tools. We are helping the Ministry of Justice to modernize with a significant funding of €18 million. We are even doing tourism promotion, wellness, to promote Sri Lanka as a destination. And overall, we are always looking at Sri Lanka being a place of refinement, of quality, of civilization. And we try to show that to the Europeans.
Like you very correctly mentioned, we also know that the government of Sri Lanka, and the government is in dialogue with the UNHRC and United Nations agencies, and on the ongoing crises and how they could help out. If I may ask you, Your Excellency, are you happy about the human rights developments that has taken place in Sri Lanka in the recent past?
Well, the question is, are the Sri Lankans happy about the developments? As far as the EU is concerned, we are looking at the report by the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. The latest report, which was just published a few days ago and being discussed now in Geneva, points to a number of elements. These elements include possible intimidation of those who protested, looks at the concept of economic crimes, looks at the militarization of the state apparatus. So there are a number of points that obviously we are looking at very carefully. On a more personal note, the fantastic expression of opinion in May, in July, that led to changes at the top, showed the resilience of Sri Lankan democracy and the vibrancy of the people expressing their views. We would regret if this would be hampered civilly. And there's one specific point in the report of the Human Rights Commissioner that is very important for the EU, is the use of PTA. The use of PTA has been there recently, despite previous guarantees that there would be a de facto moratorium on the use of the PTA. So if there's one single element that I have to focus on, it would be that. It is obviously for the Sri Lankan authorities to decide what is the best, but the Sri Lankan authorities committed to a reform of the PTA to bring it to international standard. It has been partly reformed, and now apparently it would be repealed and replaced by another piece of legislation. We want to make sure that any other piece of legislation is better, not worse than the current one.
We also know that, right, like you mentioned previously, EU has supported Sri Lanka in numerous ways. And speaking of the year 2017, that was on the 19th of May, like you correctly mentioned, EU provided Sri Lanka with better access to exporting their goods to the EU market by granting the GSP Plus. And definitely it enables Sri Lanka to export more goods to the EU market, as well as to develop their economy. But this is a crisis moment in Sri Lanka. So how would EU still assist in giving the concessions to Sri Lanka further, or at this very moment?
So the system, the general system of preferences, GSP, is a facility offered but not demanded by the EU. So it's Sri Lanka who applies to get GSP Plus. It's not that the EU requests Sri Lanka to have GSP Plus. Sri Lanka applies to have GSP Plus. So it's a request from Sri Lanka. It's a request that is based on observing 27 international conventions. Implementing 27 international conventions. So the Sri Lankan government is committed to implementing 27 conventions. So it's not that we decide what is to be done. It's commitment, and we are just looking at the way the commitment is implemented and taken up. Obviously, everyone realizes that Sri Lanka is in a difficult situation, but the commitment remains a commitment. It concerns labor standards, environmental standards, and human rights. So it's mainly for Sri Lanka to decide how important GSP Plus is and to act accordingly.
And the EU, if we speak of the EU, for Sri Lanka, it's the second largest trade partner, as well as the second main export market. And yes, EU did assist Sri Lanka during 2020 while the pandemic was on. I think they absorbed 22.4% of the export into the market. Your Excellency, how could we improve these relationships on trade further?
The potential is huge. As I said, Sri Lanka has a unique advantage of having the best of everything. You know, if you look at the clothing, they do the most expensive pieces, the one that is requires a lot of technology, such as sport equipment or bras or things that are really the upmarket. This quality is certainly there for agricultural products. Obviously, the tea is the best. Everyone knows it. Ceylon tea has no rival. But more than that, cinnamon. You know, all around the world, people consume cassia and don't know that this is a poor ersatz of cinnamon. What the EU has done, it has financed the classification of cinnamon as a geographic indication. Now, only Sri Lanka can sell or export Ceylon cinnamon, which has very different properties from cassia. The cinnamon is sold for almost 8 times the price of cassia. So by, attaching this label of quality and uniqueness to Sri Lanka, it can get much better prices. And that's the aim. You know, the tambili is simply the best. I've never had such a nice coconut anywhere around the world like here, the juice, which is now very much favored by all high-level sports people. So for every single product, we can come up with a strategy that will extract far more value and define Sri Lanka as a luxury product. It can be that for tourism, wellness is quite upmarket. I think that is the way for the relations between Sri Lanka and the EU. Then another very important element for the product is that social standard, labor standards in Sri Lanka are much higher than in the rest of the region. So therefore, in an environment where people are much more wary of the conditions in which the product has been produced and exported, this very high standards is certainly a favorable element for the Sri Lankan economy.
And also, Your Excellency, EU is the largest donor when it comes to humanitarian aid. What are your concerns about Sri Lanka receiving humanitarian aid in the upcoming years?
So, before the crisis, Sri Lanka was almost on the verge of becoming an upper middle income country. So when you have that kind of means, obviously the first humanitarian assistance should come from oneself. But the conditions of the economy have not allowed that, and the United Nations issued a humanitarian plan last June with certain targets. The EU is contributing by reallocating its funds, by doing specific projects, and other partners have come to the fore. Now, for the future, we really hope that the IMF staff level agreement and then the debt restructuring and the reforms will allow Sri Lanka to come out of the crisis quickly. We will continue our projects, and it's very important to know that the 1 billion funding that the EU has given over the last 30 years has always been grants, not loans. So we can continue our projects. It's not because there's a suspension of payment that we stop, because these are grants, not loans. And we are continuing. We are just adapting them to the crisis. As far as the EU budget for humanitarian assistance worldwide is concerned, one has to understand that most of it is being caught up by Ukraine. The invasion of Ukraine by Russia has caused dramatic humanitarian emergencies in Ukraine, and it is the duty of the EU to dedicate its funding in priority to this situation.
Speaking of crisis, yes, if you watch news, a lot of countries have different issues that's going on. But if you take a general issue, it is all to do with the climate change. And you see that the global climate change is affecting many countries. They also say that if we transfer into the green energy sector, that could help mitigate this problem. So what is your idea on that, and how can EU help Sri Lanka invest in green sector projects?
No, for sure the EU is at the forefront of the measures to mitigate and adapt to climate change. If you look at all the international negotiations on limiting the emissions, on finding tools that bring some economic incentives to work more favorably with the environment, you will see that the EU is really at the forefront of that policy approach. Now, concretely for Sri Lanka is one of the most vulnerable countries in terms of climate change. It is ranked almost every year among the top 10 most vulnerable because it is an island with heavy rains, and therefore it has a huge impact on its terrain, on the danger linked to mudslides, floods, drought. So Sri Lanka is in a particular position where it needs to address urgently its adaptation to climate change. What the EU is doing, in the last cycle of grants, which will go from 21 to 27, there are two fundamental directions for the EU. The first is a peaceful society, social inclusion, but the other one is green recovery. And in the green recovery, we are doing a green dialogue facility, which allows European consultants to share experience with the Sri Lankan government to see how legislation in Europe has managed to advance the cause of environment. So in there are policy dialogue on how to incentivize the use of green energy, if you want to deploy electric vehicles or how you want to foster the use of bicycles. We have lots of examples in Europe that we would like to share, and we are happy to fund the consultants who do that. But then we will also try to have banks and companies to share technology and funding with Sri Lankan companies so that we can be active not only in green recovery overall, but also on circular economy, how to reduce waste in food, very important, how to reduce plastic use, especially single plastic use. So all this, we are really very much on top of it, and it's one of the priority of our funding for the years to come.
And also, EU has been a great influence in the academic field of Sri Lanka. There has been cooperation and exchange within the higher education sector, as well as research and the technical studies. This all has been happening with under the Erasmus program, the Maria Skłodowska-Curie program, and the Horizon Europe Framework Program. Could you please elaborate more on this?
So you have different strands in this program. The first strand is for individual students to be able to do studies in Europe, preferably master studies. So it gives them access to the universities and grants. So that's individual endeavors, so people apply individually to receive this funding. Then there are academic projects where a university in Sri Lanka is either part of a consortium with other world universities, but mainly European, or they can lead a project with the participation of other universities. So for example, the University of Ruhuna is leading a project, and obviously it is fantastic for European researchers to come and benefit from these prestigious universities. I mean, Ruhuna has been built by Geoffrey Bawa, University of Peradeniya is magnificent, and to take advantage of the knowledge here, be the knowledge for tropical agriculture or tropical medicine or many other things. So it is really a win-win partnership that we hope to expand in the years to come.
And also, finally, the EU and Sri Lanka has agreed to convene the next joint commission meeting here in Sri Lanka next year, which is 2023. So, Your Excellency, for the next decade, what do we have lined up for Sri Lanka under this partnership that we hold?
Well, the most sincere wish of Europeans is that Sri Lanka reaches the level of continued stability so that its enormous economic, human, cultural potential can finally blossom as it should. This is a fantastic island, and what we want for the next 10 years is that, you know, through good economic choices, proper individual freedoms, society, the Sri Lankan society as a whole, not just part, but as a whole, progress together towards better economy, more empowerment, and in particular regarding women. I think that the country would benefit so much from more women in political leadership and in the parliament. You would have different angles, better policies, and like that the partnership of EU and Sri Lanka would grow from strength to strength.
So throughout our program, we've seen how EU has helped Sri Lanka in many ways. So we take this opportunity to thank EU and yourself for all the support that you have rendered Sri Lanka previously and at this moment where Sri Lanka is going through a crisis. And also we take this opportunity to wish you and your family all the very best in life.
Thank you very much. This is very kind.
This brings us to the end of the program for today, and until we meet next time, have an amazing week ahead.